The frigid air of a Chicago November whipped around the monolithic glass tower of the Vance Consolidated headquarters, but inside, Leo Vance felt nothing but the hermetically sealed chill of his own success. At 34, he was a titan, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the cutthroat world of technology and private equity. He commanded boardrooms, moved markets with a single phone call, and lived in a penthouse that stared down at the city like a god from a sterile, minimalist Olympus. Tonight, however, was not about abstract power. It was about a concrete victory. He was dining at Ethel, a temple of gastronomy, where a reservation was harder to acquire than a public apology from a politician. Across the starched white linen sat Kenji Tanaka, a notoriously cautious Japanese investor whose partnership would unlock the Asian market for Leo's latest, most audacious venture. A global satellite internet project. The deal was on a knife's edge. Everything had to be perfect. "The projected ROI is conservative, Kenji-san," Leo said, his voice a low, confident purr that had disarmed men far more formidable than this one. "We've factored in every conceivable risk." Tanaka nodded slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "Risk is a matter of perception, Vance-san, and my perception is delicate." It was at that precise moment that she appeared, a waitress, moving with a harried, nervous energy that was jarringly out of place amidst the restaurant's balletic calm. She was holding a heavy silver tray laden with their appetizers, her focus so intense on not failing that failure became inevitable. Her shoe caught on the thick pile of the Persian rug. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an excruciating slow-motion catastrophe. The tray tilted, a tureen of lobster bisque, the color of a sunset, arced through the air. It landed not on Leo, but squarely on Kenji Tanaka's pristine $1,000 suit. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Tanaka shot to his feet, a strangled cry of outrage escaping his lips as the hot liquid seeped into the fabric. The waitress stood frozen, her face ashen, the silver tray clattering to the floor. Her mouth was a perfect O of horror. Leo's mind, a machine built for damage control, instantly calculated the cost. The deal, worth billions, was likely dead. His reputation for flawless execution tarnished. Fury, cold and absolute, coiled in his gut. He turned his glacial blue eyes on the source of the disaster, ready to verbally flay her, to have her not just fired but erased from the service industry. And then he saw her face. Beneath the panic and the cheap, ill-fitting uniform, it was a face he knew better than his own reflection in the morning. The sprinkle of freckles across the bridge of her nose, faint now but unforgettable. The wide hazel eyes that could hold the sorrow of the world or the joy of a summer afternoon. The way a single strand of auburn hair always escaped to curl stubbornly by her temple. It was Clara Bell, the girl who had shared her lunch with him every day of second grade because he had none. The girl who had taught him how to skip stones across Miller's Creek. The girl whose shoulder he had cried on when his father left for good. The girl he had left behind in the dust of their dead-end Oregon town 15 years ago, with a promise to come back for her, whispered under a canopy of stars. In that single calamitous second, the meticulously constructed world of Leo Vance, billionaire, shattered. The polished floor of Ethel fell away, and he was standing on the cracked pavement of a forgotten town, a boy with nothing but a raging fire in his belly and a girl who was his entire world. And that girl was now a waitress, trembling before him, having just drowned his future in a sea of overpriced soup. The small timber town of Havenwood, Oregon, wasn't a place you came from. It was a place you escaped. It smelled of damp pine and quiet desperation. For Leo Vance, born Leo Vanchik, it was a cage. His father was a ghost who drifted in and out of their lives, leaving behind only the scent of cheap whiskey and broken promises. His mother worked 2 jobs, her hands raw and her eyes perpetually tired, just to keep their small, rented house from falling down around them. Leo's hunger wasn't just for food, it was for a different life, a life where the lights never flickered, and the future wasn't a terrifying, formless void. Clara Bell was his anchor in that storm. Her family wasn't wealthy, but their home was filled with a warmth that Leo's lacked. Her father was a gentle, lumbering man who worked at the mill, and her mother filled their tiny house with the smell of baked bread and the sound of laughter. Clara, however, had a quiet world of her own. She was always sketching, on napkins, on the backs of homework assignments, in the margins of her textbooks. She didn't just draw things, she saw them. She'd capture the exact way Mrs. Gable's lip curled before she scolded a student, or the weary slump of her own father's shoulders after a 16-hour shift. She saw the details others missed. They were an unlikely pair. Leo, all sharp angles and restless energy, planning his escape from the age of 10. Clara, with her soft edges and observant stillness, finding beauty in the very place Leo despised. They'd spend hours in the small-town library, Leo devouring books on finance, history, and physics, anything that offered a blueprint for building an empire, while Clara sat beside him, her pencil flying across a sketchbook, capturing the light falling through the dusty windows. "You see in lines and numbers," she told him once, her voice barely a whisper. "I see in shapes and shadows. One day, my numbers will buy you all the shapes and shadows you could ever want," he had vowed, his young face alight with fierce determination. "We'll get out of here, Clara. Both of us. I promise." He was her fierce protector, and she was his conscience. When local bullies targeted him for his worn-out clothes and the foreign-sounding name he hadn't yet shortened, Clara would stand beside him, silent but unmoving, her steady presence a shield more effective than any fist. In return, when her innate shyness threatened to swallow her whole, Leo would be her voice, championing her artwork to teachers and urging her to enter the local county fair art contest, which she won 3 years in a row. The divergence began, as it always does, with opportunity. A full scholarship to MIT. It was a golden ticket, a one-way ride out of Havenwood, and Leo grabbed it with both hands. The night before he left, they sat on the hood of his beat-up Ford Escort on Miller's Ridge, the town twinkling below like a handful of fallen stars. "Don't forget about us," Clara had said, her voice thick with unshed tears. She handed him a small, leather-bound sketchbook. "So you remember the shapes and shadows?" "Never," he'd promised, his voice cracking. "I'll get established. I'll make my first million, and then I'll come back, or I'll send for you. We'll build our own world." But life and ambition had other plans. MIT was a crucible. Leo thrived, driven by a terror of failure that was more potent than any caffeine. He worked harder, slept less, and was more ruthless than anyone around him. He interned at a nascent tech startup, wrote a piece of code that streamlined their data processing, and was offered a partnership before he even graduated. The first million came faster than he'd dreamed, then the first 10, then the first 100. He sent money home to his mother, moving her to a comfortable condo in Portland. He called Clara at first, their conversation strained by the growing chasm between their realities. He'd talk about venture capital and IPOs. She'd talk about her mother's failing health and the shifts she was picking up at the local diner to help pay for the medical bills. The calls became less frequent. An email here, a text there. Then silence. He told himself it was for the best. He was moving too fast. He would only disrupt her life. The truth, the one he buried deep, was that she was a reminder of a vulnerability he could no longer afford. She was the boy from Havenwood, and he was determined to become someone else entirely. The small sketchbook she'd given him remained in a box in the back of a closet, unopened for over a decade. Now, standing in the opulent dining room of Ethel, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kenji Tanaka was being discreetly escorted to the restroom by the frantic maitre d', muttering in Japanese about disrespect and dry-cleaning bills. The other patrons were staring, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. Leo's fury had evaporated, replaced by a dizzying cocktail of shock, guilt, and a profound, aching nostalgia. "Clara?" he breathed, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after so many years. Her head snapped up, her wide, terrified eyes focused on him for the first time, and a flicker of recognition cut through the panic. It was a slow, dawning horror, as if realizing the judge at her execution was a ghost from her past. "Leo," she whispered, her voice so faint it was barely audible. "Leo Vanchik." The restaurant manager, a severe man named Mr. Dubois, descended upon them like a hawk. "Mademoiselle, you are finished," he hissed, his French accent sharpening the words into daggers. "Get your things. You will be hearing from our legal department regarding the damages." Clara flinched as if struck. She looked small, fragile, utterly broken. The fierce, ambitious boy in Leo's memory roared to life. He had protected her from schoolyard bullies. This preening suit was nothing. Leo took a step forward, placing himself between Dubois and Clara. He held up a hand, and the sheer, quiet authority in the gesture stopped the manager in his tracks. "That will not be necessary," Leo said, his voice returning to its familiar, icy calm. He turned his gaze from the manager to the stunned waitress. "Miss Bell is with me." He didn't wait for a response. He took Clara's arm, his touch surprisingly gentle, and guided her away from the scene of the crime. He could feel her trembling. He led her through the labyrinthine corridors of the restaurant, past the clattering kitchen, and out a service exit into the biting Chicago wind. The alley was grimy and smelled of stale grease and damp cardboard, a world away from the perfumed air of Ethel. Clara pulled her arm away, wrapping her thin cardigan around herself, as if for protection. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You can't, they'll sue me. That man's suit. The dinner. You have no idea." "I have a very good idea," Leo said, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the worn-out look of her shoes. "The question is, what are you doing here, Clara, in Chicago, as a waitress?" A flash of the old Havenwood pride sparked in her eyes. "I'm surviving, Leo. It's what people do when they don't get a golden ticket to MIT." The words were sharp, laced with 15 years of unspoken resentment. The sting was deserved. I'm sorry," he stammered, the words feeling inadequate, pathetic. "I lost touch. My work, it consumed me." "Consumed you?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "It looks like it paid you pretty well. Leo Vance, I've seen the name in magazines. I never thought it was you. The boy I knew was Leo Vanchik. I changed it. It was easier for business," he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What happened to her art? To her parents? To the dreams they had whispered about under the stars? But the alley was no place for this. "Look," he said, his voice softening, "I messed up. For years. Let me at least fix this. Don't worry about the restaurant or the suit. I'll handle it. It's just money." Her chin lifted. I don't want your money, Leo. I never did. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's right, he insisted, slipping back into the role of the problem solver. He pulled out a sleek, black card. This is my personal number. I'm staying at the Peninsula. Meet me for breakfast tomorrow, 8 o'clock, the lobby cafe. We need to talk. She stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake. So you can what? Write me a charity check and clear your conscience before you fly off to conquer another continent. Her perception was as sharp as ever. That was, in fact, part of his plan. A clean, financial solution. But seeing her here, so raw and real, had stirred something else within him. Something he'd long thought dead. No, he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. So I can understand. Please, Clara. For the sake of Miller's Creek. The mention of their childhood sanctuary made her falter. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She took the card, her fingers brushing his, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through him. Fine, she whispered, turning to walk away down the dark alley. One breakfast. Leo watched her go, until her slight figure was swallowed by the city night. He was left alone with the biting wind and the disquieting realization that for all his wealth and power, the biggest debt he owed in his life was to the waitress he'd just saved, and it had nothing to do with a ruined suit. The next morning, the Peninsula's lobby cafe was an oasis of quiet luxury. Leo sat at a secluded table, a cup of untouched black coffee before him. He'd spent the night in a state of agitation that was entirely foreign to him. His chief of staff, a ruthlessly efficient woman named Evelyn, had already handled the fallout. A sincere apology and a wire transfer large enough to buy Mr. Tanaka a controlling interest in a Savile Row tailor had smoothed things over. A hefty donation to Mr. Dubois' favorite charity had ensured Clara's record at Ethel was wiped clean, with a non-disclosure agreement attached. The problem, as he'd told Clara, was handled. Yet the real problem remained. She arrived at 8 o'clock on the dot, looking even more out of place than she had the night before. She wore jeans, a faded green sweater, and the same worn-out boots. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without the restaurant's harsh lighting, he could see the true depth of the exhaustion etched on her features. She clutched the strap of a worn leather satchel as if it were a life raft. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing as she approached. She nodded, avoiding his eyes as she slid into the chair opposite him. "I shouldn't have. This is a mistake." A waiter materialized, and Leo ordered for them both, remembering she always liked hot chocolate on cold mornings. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, a silent acknowledgement that some part of the boy he was still existed. "Clara, what happened?" he asked gently, once the waiter had departed. "Your art. You were going to go to the Pacific Northwest College of Art. You had a scholarship." She traced a pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. "Life happened, Leo. My mum's MS got worse right after you left. The medical bills, they were astronomical. My dad's hours at the mill were cut. The scholarship only covered tuition. It didn't cover living expenses or the cost of her care. So I stayed. I worked. At the diner, then at the hardware store. Anywhere that would hire me." She finally looked up at him, her hazel eyes clear and direct, holding a universe of hardship he could barely comprehend. "She passed away 5 years ago. My dad. He wasn't the same after. He sold the house to cover the last of the debt and moved to a retirement community in Arizona. He died last year." Leo felt a hollow ache in his chest. While he was celebrating stock options and corporate takeovers, her world had been quietly and painfully dismantled. "And your brother? What about Danny?" A shadow passed over her face. Danny is Danny, always looking for the easy way out. He got into some trouble a few years back. Bad investments, worse people. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. I left Oregon to get away from it all, to try and start over somewhere no one knew me or my family's problems. He borrowed money from you? Leo pressed. She shook her head. Worse. He used my name as a co-signer on a loan without telling me. From a private lender, not a bank. A man named Silas Richter. When Danny defaulted and disappeared, this Richter came looking for me. He said I owed him $50,000, plus interest that seems to double every time I miss a payment. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the tone of someone who has been living with a nightmare for so long it has become normal. $50,000. To Leo it was a rounding error, the cost of a weekend in Aspen. To her it was an anchor, drowning her. "I'll pay it," he said instantly, reaching for his phone. "Give me the man's name and number. I'll have the funds transferred today. It's done." Clara recoiled as if he'd offered her poison. "No, absolutely not. I told you I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's a solution," he argued, frustrated by her stubborn pride. This was how his world worked. A problem arose, he threw money and resources at it, until it disappeared. Why would you choose to struggle under this thug, when I can make it go away in 5 minutes? "Because it's my struggle, Leo," she shot back, her voice rising, attracting glances from nearby tables. "It's the one thing I have left that's mine. You flew out of Havenwood and never looked back. I stayed and cleaned up the messes. My mum's, my dad's, Danny's. I'm not about to let you swoop in and clean up mine. I will not be another one of your acquisitions." The word acquisition struck him like a slap. Was that how she saw him? As a corporate raider, even in his personal life? The waiter arrived with their order, the interruption forcing a tense silence. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm mug of hot chocolate, her knuckles white. Leo took a different tack. "Okay," he said softly. "I understand. No charity." He paused, his mind racing, reframing the problem. "Then let me offer you a job." She looked at him, skeptical. "Doing what? Spilling soup on your competitors?" He almost smiled. "No. Something you're uniquely qualified for." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Clara, you always saw things other people missed. You didn't just draw people. You understood them. You read their posture, their expressions, the little tics they thought they were hiding. That's a skill, a valuable one." He thought of the hundreds of people he employed, analysts, programmers, marketers. They were brilliant, but they saw data, not people. "I'm in the middle of a hostile takeover bid for a company," he continued, the idea solidifying as he spoke. "The CEO, Marcus Thorne, is a snake. He's polished, charming. But I know he's hiding something. My team has gone through his company's financials with a fine-tooth comb and found nothing. But the numbers aren't telling the whole story. I need a different perspective. I need someone who sees the shapes and shadows, not just the lines and numbers." He looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "I want to hire you as a consultant. Attend a few meetings with me. Observe Thorne and his team. Tell me what you see. I'll pay you a consulting fee, a generous one. Say, $75,000 for a month of your time. What you do with that money is your business. It's not a handout, it's a salary. You'll have earned it." Clara stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. "You want to pay me $75,000 to people watch?" "I want to pay you for your unique insight," he corrected. "Think of it as a freelance commission, like for a piece of art, the subject just happens to be a corporate sociopath. She was silent for a long time, sipping her hot chocolate. He could see the gears turning in her mind. It was an elegant solution, he thought. It solved her financial problem, salved her pride, and genuinely gave him a potential edge over his rival. He was also creating a reason to keep her in his life, a fact he chose not to examine too closely. Finally, she set the mug down. 1 month, she said, her voice steady. And I need a contract, a real one, drawn up by a lawyer, not a handshake deal over breakfast. Leo felt a surge of triumph, quickly followed by a pang of something else. Respect. She was no one's fool. Done, he said. My legal team will have it for you by noon. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, worn sketchbook and a charcoal pencil. While he had been talking, she had been sketching him on a blank page. It wasn't a flattering portrait. It was a man in a brutally expensive suit, his shoulders tense, his eyes holding a calculating distance. It was the CEO, the billionaire. But in the set of his jaw, she had captured a flicker of something else, a deep, buried loneliness. It was him. The real him, and it was terrifying. One more condition, she said, not looking at the drawing. While I'm working for you, you have to talk to me. Not as a boss, but as Leo. Tell me what happened to the boy who promised he'd come back. The request was more intimidating than any negotiation he'd ever faced. He looked from the piercing accuracy of the sketch to the unwavering honesty in her eyes. Deal, he said, his voice huskier than he intended. The contract was signed that afternoon. Clara insisted on reading every clause, her brow furrowed in concentration, before adding her neat, artistic signature. The first transfer of funds was initiated, a down payment that would keep the menacing Silas Richter at bay for the time being. The next few weeks were a surreal blend of two colliding worlds. Leo brought Clara into the gleaming, sterile environment of Vance Consolidated. He gave her an office with a view that stretched to Lake Michigan, which she mostly ignored, preferring to sit in the corner of conference rooms, sketchbook in hand, silent and watchful. Her presence was a disruption. Leo's executive team, a collection of sharp-suited sharks who spoke in acronyms and jargon, didn't know what to make of her. They saw a quiet, plainly dressed woman doodling in a notebook and dismissed her. Leo simply introduced her as a behavioral consultant, a title vague enough to be impressive. Their first meeting with Marcus Thorne was at Thorne's own opulent office. Thorne was exactly as Leo had described him, handsome, charismatic, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, reptilian eyes. He oozed a false sincerity that set Clara's teeth on edge. While Leo and Thorne traded veiled threats disguised as corporate pleasantries, Clara observed. She didn't listen to the talk of synergy and leveraged assets. She watched Thorne's hands. He kept them perfectly still on his desk, a display of calm control, but his right thumb constantly, almost imperceptibly, rubbed the side of his index finger, a self-soothing gesture. A tell. He wasn't as calm as he appeared. She watched his CFO, a nervous man named Peterson, who flinched every time Thorne spoke his name. After the meeting, back in Leo's limo, he turned to her expectantly. Well, Thorne's a predator, she said quietly, flipping through her sketchbook. She had drawn Thorne not as a man, but as a panther, coiled and waiting. But he's afraid of something. He's projecting confidence to hide an insecurity. And his CFO, Peterson? He's terrified of him. Not respectful, not intimidated. Genuinely terrified. Thorne has something on him. It was more than Leo's team had gleaned in 6 months of financial analysis. What kind of something? I don't know, she admitted. But when you mentioned the quarterly reports for his South American subsidiary, Peterson looked like he was going to be physically ill. Thorne just smiled, but his thumb-rubbing went into overdrive. Leo immediately put his data mining team on the South American subsidiary, telling them to dig deeper, to look for any anomaly, no matter how small. Outside of the office, their dynamic was even more complex. Leo, true to his word, began to open up. He took her to dinner, not at places like Ethel, but to a small, family-run Italian place in Lincoln Park he'd discovered. Over plates of pasta, he talked about the crushing loneliness of his life, the transactional nature of his relationships, the constant pressure to be infallible. When you're at the top, everyone either wants something from you or wants to see you fall, he confessed one night. There's no room for real connection. It's a liability. Clara, in turn, shared more of her own story. She spoke of the quiet dignity with which her mother faced her illness, the hollowing grief of losing both her parents, and the suffocating weight of her brother's betrayal. She pulled out her sketchbook and showed him her real work. Not the quick, observational sketches of executives, but beautiful, haunting landscapes of Havenwood, filled with a melancholic light. She had captured the soul of the place he had been so desperate to escape. How could you find beauty in a place that was so broken? He asked, genuinely mystified. Because everything is a little broken, Leo, she replied softly. That doesn't mean it isn't beautiful. He felt the cynical armor he had worn for 15 years begin to crack. He was spending less time at the office, delegating more to Evelyn. He found himself looking forward to his conversations with Clara more than any business deal. He took her to the Art Institute, and as she stood before a painting by Monet, her face rapt with emotion, he felt a protective instinct so fierce it startled him. But their fragile, burgeoning world was not immune to external threats. The first was Silas Richter. He was not pleased with Clara's partial, on-time payments. He wanted his lump sum. He started calling her, his voice a gravelly menace on the phone. "A little bird told me you're keeping fancy company now, little girl," he'd rasped in one call she took in Leo's presence. "Don't think your rich boyfriend can make me go away. The debt is the debt, and my interest keeps growing." Leo, overhearing, took the phone from her. "This is Leo Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "You will address Miss Bell with respect, and you will direct all future communications to my legal department. If you contact her directly again, I will use the full weight of my resources to investigate every corner of your life and your business. I assure you, you will not enjoy the experience." He hung up. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide. "You shouldn't have done that." "I should have done it sooner," he countered, his jaw tight. "This is what my resources are for, to protect the people I care about." The second, more dangerous threat was Marcus Thorne. Leo's renewed focus on the South American subsidiary had clearly spooked him. Thorne wasn't a man who played defense. He attacked. He must have had Leo investigated, because one afternoon, Leo's head of security brought him a disturbing report. A private investigator, known for his dirty tactics and employed frequently by Thorne, had been seen in Clara's neighborhood, talking to her landlord, asking questions at the local coffee shop. Thorne knew about Clara, and like a true predator, he had identified Leo's vulnerability. He wasn't just going to come after Leo's company anymore. He was going to come after her. The climax arrived, as it so often does, in a public forum designed for maximum humiliation. Thorne, in a gesture of supposed goodwill, invited Leo and his consultant to dinner to hash out their differences. The venue he chose, with a cruelty so precise it could only be intentional, was Ethel. Leo wanted to refuse, but knew it would be seen as a sign of weakness. "We don't have to go," he told Clara, his concern for her overriding his business instincts. Clara, however, squared her shoulders. The last time she was in this restaurant, she was a terrified waitress. She refused to be that person again. "No," she said, her voice firm. "We're going. I'm not going to hide from him." When they arrived, Mr. Dubois greeted them with a bow, his earlier arrogance replaced by an oily deference. He led them to the very same table where the bisque disaster had occurred. Marcus Thorne was already there, a smug, predatory grin on his face. Sitting beside him was his nervous CFO, Peterson. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Thorne was charming, witty, and utterly savage. He made casual, cutting remarks designed to highlight the chasm between Leo's world and Clara's. "I must confess, Leo, I was surprised by you. The silence that descended upon the table at Ethel was a physical thing, heavier and more suffocating than the perfumed air. It was a vacuum, pulling in the shocked stares of nearby diners, the frantic calculations of the maitre d', and the entire, meticulously constructed universe of Leo Vance. Marcus Thorne's chair lay on the floor like a casualty of war, and in the center of the wreckage sat James Peterson, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with the dry, silent sobs of a man who had lost everything, and, in the same instant, been granted a terrifying, unwanted freedom. Leo's mind, for the first time in 15 years, was utterly blank. His usual cascade of strategic responses, of damage control and opportunity assessment, had failed to materialize. He could only stare at Clara. She was not gloating. She was not triumphant. She was looking at Peterson with an expression of such profound, aching empathy that it felt like a physical blow. She had not deployed a weapon. She had lanced a wound. And in doing so, she had revealed the rot at the core of Thorne's empire and, more frighteningly, the hollowness at the center of his own. He had come here to conquer, to acquire, to win. She had come and simply seen. Slowly, as if emerging from a trance, Clara reached across the table and placed her hand on Peterson's trembling forearm. She didn't speak. The touch was a quiet anchor in his maelstrom of shame. "Let's get you out of here," Leo heard himself say, his voice sounding distant, unfamiliar. He gestured to one of his security men, who had been dining discreetly nearby. "Harrison, please escort Mr. Peterson to the car. Get him a room at the Peninsula on my account. Ensure he has whatever he needs. And find out where his wife is staying. She needs to know he's safe." It was the voice of command, but the orders were not strategic. They were human. Harrison, a man accustomed to instructions involving corporate espionage and threat mitigation, simply nodded, his professionalism a small, solid thing in the surreal chaos. He helped the broken CFO to his feet and guided him away, a ghost leaving his own haunting. Leo turned back to Clara. The restaurant was a blur of whispers and averted eyes. He felt a sudden, desperate need to escape the gilded cage of Ethel, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the scent of judgment and overpriced perfume. He threw a black credit card on the table without looking at the bill. "Cover everyone's dinner," he told the stunned Mr. Dubois, "for the inconvenience." He took Clara's arm, his touch now less a gesture of guidance and more one of seeking ballast. They walked out of the restaurant, the silence between them stretching through the lobby, into the waiting limousine, and out into the river of taillights on the Chicago streets. Inside the car's hushed leather interior, the city slid past in streaks of neon and gold. For a long time, neither spoke. Leo stared out the window, seeing not the skyline he had conquered, but the reflection of the man in the brutally expensive suit sitting next to a woman in a simple dress who had just shown him what true power was. It wasn't the ability to move markets. It was the ability to see a soul. "Are you all right?" he asked finally, the question feeling absurdly inadequate. Clara was tracing the condensation on her window with a fingertip. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I feel like I just took a man's life apart, piece by piece, in front of a crowd." "You took a bully's weapon away from him," Leo corrected, his voice low. "You gave Peterson a chance to stop lying. That's not destruction, Clara. It's a terrifying kind of grace." She looked at him then, her hazel eyes searching his. "Is that what you do, Leo? Do you offer terrifying kinds of grace?" The question hit its mark. He thought of the companies he'd gutted, the rivals he'd crushed, the people he'd treated as entries on a balance sheet. "No," he said, the admission tasting like ash. "I've mostly just been terrifying." He reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. He held them, not in a gesture of romance, but of shared humanity. Two people from a forgotten town, sitting in a bubble of impossible wealth, having just witnessed a life implode. The victory felt nothing like he'd imagined. It felt quiet and heavy and immensely complicated. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering. Peterson, with the full backing of Leo's formidable legal team, became the SEC's star witness. The case against Thorne was airtight, built on a foundation of blackmail and systemic fraud. The financial world was rocked by the scandal. Leo Vance was lauded as a genius, a corporate crusader who had exposed a massive deception. The articles in the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times painted him as a visionary. They never once mentioned the name Clara Bell. And for that, Leo was profoundly grateful. He had protected her from the narrative, kept her out of the story. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the story was entirely hers. His victory felt fraudulent. He'd sit in board meetings where his team presented projections on the value of Thorne's soon-to-be-acquired assets, and all he could see was Peterson's bare ring finger, the ghost of a commitment to a life that had been leveraged into ruin. 2 days after the dinner, as the dust was beginning to settle, the past reasserted itself in a far more brutish form. Leo was in his penthouse office, a sterile expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city, when his head of security buzzed him. "Sir, there's a Mr. Silas Richter in the lobby. He's demanding to see Ms. Bell. He's insistent." Ice flooded Leo's veins. He had neutralized Thorne, a titan of industry. He had forgotten about the grubby little predator from the alleyways of Clara's life. "Do not let him upstairs. I'm coming down," Leo commanded. He found Clara in the living area, sketching the storm clouds gathering over Lake Michigan. She looked up as he entered, a question in her eyes. "Stay here," he said, his voice tight. "There's someone downstairs. I'll handle it." Her eyes narrowed. She had the uncanny ability to read the truth beneath his words. "It's him, isn't it? Richter?" She stood, closing her sketchbook. "I'm coming with you." "Clara, no. This is exactly the kind of thing my resources are for. Let me protect you." "You're still not getting it, Leo," she said, her voice firm, devoid of the fear he expected. "This isn't about protection. It's about standing up. He has held this power over me for years. I will not let you face him for me. We will face him together." In the cavernous, marble-floored lobby, Silas Richter was a study in cheap menace. He was a thick-set man in a shiny suit, his face florid, his small eyes darting around as if assessing the value of the fixtures. He was flanked by 2 men who were little more than slabs of muscle. Richter's eyes lit up with predatory glee when he saw Clara. Then he saw Leo, and his expression shifted to one of resentful appraisal. "Well, well," Richter sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. Look at you, little bird. Found yourself a golden cage. I told you your boyfriend couldn't make me disappear. The debt is the debt. It's now 82,000, by the way. Interest is a bitch." Leo stepped forward, his body language radiating a cold, lethal authority that had made CEOs tremble. "The only communication you'll be having regarding Ms. Bell is with my lawyers," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Richter laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Lawyers? I don't deal with lawyers. I deal with consequences. This girl's brother put her on the hook. She owes me, and I always collect." He took a step toward Clara, his eyes filled with a proprietary ugliness. "Maybe we can arrange a different kind of payment plan, now that you're living so high and mighty." Before Leo could physically remove the man, Clara spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a shard of glass. "No." Richter stopped, surprised by her tone. "You're right, Mr. Richter," Clara continued, her gaze unwavering. "My brother made a mistake, and my name is on the paper. But you and I both know this isn't about a loan. It's about preying on people who have no other options. People like my father was, after my mother's medical bills. People all over this city, all over the country, who you trap in a cycle of debt and fear." She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. You are not a force of nature. You are just a small, greedy man who has built a business on misery. And it's over." Leo watched, mesmerized. This was not the trembling waitress from Ethel. This was a woman forged in the quiet fires of grief and resilience, now finally claiming her own power. "You're a funny girl," Richter snarled, his bravado faltering. "Mr. Vance was going to just pay you off to make you go away," Clara said, glancing at Leo. "But I told him that wasn't the right solution, because it would only be a solution for me. So instead, we've retained the services of the law firm, Massey, Klein, and Spector. They're filing a class action lawsuit against you and your company on behalf of myself and 17 other families your business has ruined. Your assets are going to be frozen, pending investigation. Your life is going to be put under a microscope. Every threat, every illegal interest charge, every life you've destroyed. We're going to see it all." Richter's face went from red to a pasty white. He looked from Clara's resolute face to Leo's icy calm and understood he was no longer dealing with a scared waitress. He was facing an army. He sputtered, pointing a trembling finger. You can't—" "Get out of my building," Leo said, the words landing like blows, "and expect to hear from my lawyers, and the district attorney, and the IRS." Richter and his thugs practically scrambled over each other to get out the revolving doors, a pathetic retreat. Clara stood her ground, watching them go. She let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally leaving her. Leo came to stand beside her. "You were magnificent," he breathed, his admiration absolute. She leaned her head against his shoulder for just a moment. "I'm so tired of being scared, Leo." "You'll never have to be again," he promised. But he knew the promise was different now. He wasn't promising to slay her dragons. He was promising to hand her the sword. With Thorne and Richter dealt with, only one ghost remained, her brother, Danny. Leo's investigators found him working as a day laborer in Reno, living in a weekly rate motel. Clara knew she had to see him. This time, she asked Leo to come with her. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. Danny was thinner than she remembered, his eyes holding the haunted, hunted look of a man perpetually running from himself. The reunion was not fiery. It was freighted with the sorrow of 1,000 shared memories and one profound betrayal. "I'm sorry, Clara," he mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. "I never meant for you to get caught up in it." "But you knew I would, Danny," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You knew, and you did it anyway. Because that's what you do. You find the easy way out, and you never look at who gets hurt in your wake." She sat down on the edge of the lumpy bed. "I'm not here to yell at you. I'm not here to forgive you, either. Forgiveness is something you have to earn. I'm here to tell you that it stops. I will not be your safety net anymore. I will not carry your debts. The lawsuit against Richter will require your testimony. You have to stand up and take responsibility for what you did. It's the only way you'll ever stop running." She slid a piece of paper across the dusty nightstand. It was the contact information for a therapist and a debt counseling service, both of which Leo had arranged to be prepaid for a year. "This is the last handout you will ever get from me," she said. "This is a door. Whether you walk through it is up to you. I love you, Danny, but I have to love myself more. Goodbye." She walked out of the room without looking back. In the car, she was silent for a long time. Leo drove, heading out of the city and into the vast, empty desert. The setting sun painted the mountains in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. "Thank you for being there," she said finally, her voice thick. "Always," he replied. "He looked so much like Dad at the end," she whispered. "Tired. Beaten." "He's not your father," Leo said, his voice firm. "And you are not your mother. You don't have to spend your life cleaning up the messes of the men you love." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration and a release. Back in Chicago, the change in Leo became palpable. The victory over Thorne, which should have been the crowning achievement of his career, felt strangely hollow. He sat in his office, staring at a wall of monitors displaying real-time market data, the lines and numbers that had defined his existence. For the first time, they looked like a foreign language, an intricate code that described everything and explained nothing. He found himself drawn instead to Clara's sketchbook, which she'd left on his coffee table. He flipped through the pages. There was a sketch of Thorne, not as a CEO, but as a man clutching a mask to his face. There was Peterson, a figure crumbling under an invisible weight. There was Richter, a spider in the center of a web. And there was him. Dozens of sketches of him. In a meeting, his jaw tight. On the phone, his eyes distant. Staring out at the city, a lonely silhouette against the glass. She had captured his power, his ambition, his success, and in every single drawing, she had captured his profound isolation. He picked up the phone and called Evelyn, his fiercely competent CEO. "Evelyn," he said, "sell my shares in the pharmaceutical conglomerate, all of them." There was a pause. "Sir, that's a 20% stake. It's one of our most profitable holdings." "I read their latest report," Leo said, looking at a sketch of a tired woman who looked hauntingly like his own mother. "They raised the price of an essential MS drug by 400%. Sell it." "What should I tell the board?" "Tell them our new metric for investment isn't just ROI, it's impact. Tell them we're re-evaluating what it means to be profitable." He established the Bell Vance Foundation that week. It wasn't a tax shelter or a PR move. It was a mission. He poured hundreds of millions into it, seeding it with the profits from the Thorne acquisition. Its mandate was simple: to fund the things that numbers couldn't measure: art therapy programs, mental health services in poor communities, legal aid for victims of predatory lending. Clara, meanwhile, had found her own path. She enrolled at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, her focus on art therapy. She had found her calling in the wreckage of that dinner at Ethel. She wanted to use her unique sight, not to expose people, but to help them heal. One cool spring evening, a year after their reunion, Leo walked into his penthouse. The cold, minimalist decor had been softened. Canvases leaned against the walls, sketches were pinned up, and the air smelled faintly of turpentine and charcoal. It felt less like a monument and more like a home. He found Clara not in her studio, but in his old, cavernous office. She was standing in front of the great glass wall overlooking the city. "I remember the first time I came up here," she said, without turning. "I thought this was the top of the world. But it's not, is it? It's just a really beautiful cage." "It was," he agreed, coming to stand beside her. "I think I built it to keep the world out. Or maybe to keep the boy from Havenwood locked in." He was holding something in his hand, a small, worn, leather-bound sketchbook, the one she had given him the night he left for MIT. "I never opened it," he confessed, his voice thick with a shame that felt 15 years old. "I packed it away. I think I was afraid of what was inside, afraid it would pull me back." "And now?" she asked softly. With trembling fingers he opened it. The pages were filled with charcoal sketches of their shared past. Miller's Creek, the crooked porch of her childhood home, the dusty interior of the town library, and people. Her father, smiling, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. His own mother, her hands raw, looking out a window. And on the last page, a drawing of a boy with fierce, hungry eyes, sitting on the hood of a car, looking up at a sky full of impossibly bright stars. Beneath it, in her neat script, were the words, "For Leo. So you never forget the shapes and shadows." A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He had spent his entire adult life building an empire of lines and numbers, all in an effort to forget the shapes and shadows that had made him. "I almost forgot," he whispered. "I almost lost the best part of myself." "No, you didn't," she said, taking his hand. "You just built a fortress around him, and he's finally ready to come out." He turned to her, his blue eyes clear of the old, calculating chill. "I went back to Havenwood. I bought the old mill, the one that broke your father's back and then laid him off." She stared at him, confused. "I'm not tearing it down," he said. He pulled a set of rolled blueprints from a tube leaning against the wall. He spread them out on the vast desk where he had signed billion-dollar deals. "We are." The plans showed the old mill, retrofitted and reimagined. It was a mixed-use facility, a tech incubator to bring new jobs to the town, a vocational training center. And in the heart of it, taking up the entire sunlit top floor, was the Clara Bell Arts Center, a community space dedicated to arts education and therapy. "I spent my life trying to escape that place," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Running from the memory of being the poor kid, the son of a drunk. But it's not just a place of ghosts, Clara. It's where you taught me how to skip stones. It's where I learned what loyalty looked like. It's our foundation." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I don't want to acquire companies anymore. I want to build things, real things. With you, I don't want to promise you a world I can buy. I want to ask if you'll help me build one that's worth living in." Tears streamed down her face as she looked from the blueprints to his face. She didn't give him a verbal answer. She simply picked up a piece of charcoal from the desk, turned to the vast glass wall that had been his shield and his prison, and began to draw. On the gleaming surface, overlooking the glittering, conquered city, she sketched the outline of a winding creek, a great oak tree, and two small figures sitting side by side, their faces turned up toward a sky full of stars. He came and stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. Together, they looked past their reflection, past the city below, at the new shape their future was taking. It wasn't an escape. It was a homecoming.